All right, class. Well, we're going to be reviewing populations and communities today. So here we go. Populations in general is just a group of individuals of the same species that live in the same space in a specific time. So if you look at the image over here, you've got a bunch of frogs. Not many in this case, but usually populations have greater numbers. And they're living together as a population, more than one of the same species in the same space in a given time. And population size refers to the number of individuals in the population. So what that means is really how many are there. If we are looking at population size, there are things that affect, factors that affect the population size. How do we get more or how do we get fewer individuals in our population? We have birth. So when individuals give birth, you gain into your population. Then the opposite would be death. To lose an individual, they would die of old age or predation. But there's also immigration, when you have individuals of the same species coming in to your population. And again, opposite to that is emigration, where they exit, where they leave the population to go to a different one. Population density is slightly different from population size. Population density is the number of individuals but over a given area or volume. So there's a little bit of a formula involved here. So your population density is going to be how many individuals you have, so your population size, divided by the area or volume, if we're talking about something like fish, where these individuals are found. And there's different ways of measuring population size. Now we're going back to population size. There's counting individuals. So if you just count how many you have, this is the easiest one. You could either look at satellite imagery or you can go into the wild and actually just count what you see if the animals are large enough. But if there's lots of places, a large area that you need to calculate, that would be more difficult. So you can do what we call counting by sample area or mark and recapture. And there are formulas for these. So counting by sample area is a simple equation where you would end up doing some sort of cross multiplication. You would know the number of individuals in a given section of that total area, and you would make that equal to the population size divided by your total area, what you're really looking for, the area you're really looking for, and you would cross multiply. You would always be given, or you would always know 3 out of the 4 variables. For mark and recapture, it's a little bit weirder. You've got a population size, which is equal to the number of marked animals times the total number of animals captured the second time, and you divide that by the number of marked animals that were recaptured. And here's a little bit of an example. Suppose for example that 100 Canadian geese have been captured, marked, and released. If on the second capture 50 out of the 100 geese are tagged, then the population size is estimated to be 400 individuals. So they're showing you the math involved. The number of marked animals was 100. You're multiplying by the number that were captured the second time around. And of that second time around, how many were marked? Well, you would divide by the 50 that you ended up catching a second time. And that formula gives you 400 individuals. If you need a few extra minutes to let that sink in, pause the video, reread it until it makes sense. But moving on. Population distribution, or how the organisms are going to be dispersed, there are 3 different ways. You've got uniform, where when your animals are just going to take up a normal uniform amount of space. It's not random, but they plan out the same distance between each other. The next one would be random, where you can see there's some sections where they're closer together, some sections where they're further apart. This could be, for example, something like just trees in a forest. They randomly have their seeds falling down, and you'll get some that are closer together, some that are further apart. And lastly, you get The last one over here, which is clumped distribution, where the animals actually group together. And this could be due to environmental reasons, like being next to water, or because they want to stay together as a pack. Let's say, for example, lions or a school of fish that clump together for protection. Communities and biodiversity. Communities are a set of populations of different species now that share the same space. So let's say before we looked at a community of frogs, a population of frogs. This time we're going to have a community that includes frogs, but also fish, insects, and plants and whatnot. So we have different species that share the same space. And biodiversity refers to how many different species you have. The greater the biodiversity, the greater the amount of different species you have in that community. There are some ecological factors that affect your community, which is abiotic. Here you can see A for non and biotic meaning living. Your examples could be soil pH or the amount of sunlight or amount of water. These abiotic factors will change the type of organisms that live in a specific environment. Same thing for biotic, which means living. So biotic factors would be something like the presence of animals, which would be the food, let's say, for a lion. If there's not enough gazelles, then you would probably not have the same amount, a large amount of lions. And there are relationships within your community. There are 4 that we're going to be looking at. There is predation, which is when you have a gain for one person, the predator, and a loss for the prey. And in this case, the loss is going to be death. And your example is like a cat and mouse. A cat's going to be eating the mouse, killing the mouse. The mouse is the one that dies and loses. The cat gains by feeding on the mouse. Somewhat similar to predation is parasitism. The big difference here is that there is no death involved, or at least not immediately. There's still a gain and a loss. The gain goes to the parasite, the loss goes to its host, but the host still lives throughout the parasite's attachment. So the example would be the tapeworm inside the dog. The tapeworm is inside the dog feeding off of the dog's food, and the dog is at a loss because it's losing the food to the tapeworm, but it's not dying. Another example would be competition, where both organisms lose out. So let's say a lion that is fighting another lion for food. This is a loss for both because 1, they're going to be either expending precious energy to fight, 2, they might get injured in the fight, or 3, they might have to back down from the fight and leave with nothing. You've got mutualism, which is the opposite of competition, where both organisms gain. There's the example of a bird that is cleaning the teeth of the crocodile. So the bird is getting the food from between the crocodile's teeth, and the crocodile is gaining from the bird's by having its teeth cleaned. So it's a win-win situation. And there's lastly what we call commensalism, which is where you have a gain from one person or one organism, but the other remains unaffected. So in this case, you've got a bird and a rhinoceros. The bird lives on the rhinoceros's back and gets protection from other animals or from predation, whereas the rhino is not getting any benefit from this relationship, but is also not being harmed in the same time. So that is it for this review. I hope you guys have a great time studying. Good luck.